The history of the Democratic Party is so obfuscated by today's left, the media, and the American public schools that it cannot go unnoticed. As someone who likes to read history, I can clearly see the racist history of the Democratic Party. The fact is that the American education system is geared towards hiding this history to the extent that it cannot be left unchallenged anymore.
Trigger warning. This video violates all forms of safe spaces. Leftists, run immediately.
The first way this is done is by shifting the blame from the Democratic Party's early history to America. As we all know, the Democratic Party was founded by Andrew Jackson and his posse John C. Calhoun. Now, Jackson wanted to abolish the Electoral College and ran against the wealthy bankers. Jackson was also behind the Indian Removal Act, which is possibly the most racist legislation passed in American history. Calhoun, just for the sake of the argument, was more racist than Jackson, and I don't know how that's even possible. But the racist history of the Democratic Party didn't just stick there. It went on to the Confederacy. If you look at Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederacy, he was a Democrat. His vice president, Alexander H. Stephens, was also a Democrat, along with the Confederate Congress. For all who don't know, the Confederacy was the one who put up the fight against Abraham Lincoln in order to not abolish slavery. What's even more racist is that it went to the 20th century with Woodrow Wilson. Wilson was a liberal Democrat like any other today. He pushed for the income tax, the Federal Reserve, and everything the left loves. Just on some insight on Woodrow Wilson. Born in Virginia and raised in Georgia and South Carolina, Wilson was a loyal son of the Old South who regretted the outcome of the Civil War. He used his high office to reverse some of its consequences. When he entered the White House 100 years ago today, Washington was a rigidly segregated town, except for federal government agencies. They had been integrated during the post-war Reconstruction period, enabling African Americans to obtain federal jobs and work side by side with whites in government agencies. Wilson promptly authorized members of his cabinet to reverse this long-standing policy of racial integration in the federal civil service. Cabinet heads such as his son-in-law, Secretary of the Treasury, William McAdoo of Tennessee, resegregated facilities such as restrooms and cafeterias in their buildings. In some federal offices, screens were used to separate white and black workers. African Americans found it difficult to secure high-level civil service positions, which some had held under previous Republican administrations. A delegation of black professionals led by Monroe Trotter, a Phi Beta Kappa graduate of Harvard and Boston newspaper editor, appeared at the White House to protest the new policies. But Wilson treated them rudely and declared that segregation is not a humiliation, but a benefit, and ought to be so regarded by you gentlemen. The novel The Klansman by Thomas Dixon, a longtime political supporter, friend, and former classmate of Wilson at Johns Hopkins University, was published in 1905. A decade later, with Wilson in the White House, cinematographer D.W. Griffith produced a motion picture version of the book titled Birth of a Nation. With quotations from Wilson's scholarly writings and his subtitles, the silent film denounced the Reconstruction period in the South when blacks briefly held elective office in several states. It hailed the rise of the Ku Klux Klan as a sign of Southern white society's recovery from the humiliation and suffering to which the federal government and the Northern carpetbaggers had subjected it after its defeat in the Civil War. The film depicted African Americans, most played by white actors in blackface, and as uncouth, uncivilized rabble. Wilson described the film Birth of a Nation as shockingly true, and he pointed known segregationists to his cabinet. That is clear signs of racism, and this was in the 20th century. But the left continues to tell us that this was done by America, not any single party, even though every atrocities committed by America was done by Democratic politicians, Democratic governors, and Democratic sheriffs. The second way the left muddies the water is by saying there was an ideological shift between the two parties.
And the parties were switching at the time. It was conservative versus liberal. And guess what? All of the conservatives voted against the Civil Rights Act. All the liberals were the ones who voted for it.
Now, any historian can completely debunk this myth by taking an example of Calvin Coolidge and separating it between the past Democratic presidents Woodrow Wilson, clear racist, and Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Let's focus on Franklin Delano Roosevelt for a second. He is a Democratic icon for his passage of his New Deal Act, which included the Wagner Act, the Social Security Act, and the Banking Act of 1933. Any American should know that Japanese Americans during the World War were locked up in internment camps. But the question has to be asked, who did that? His name starts with an F and ends with an O. He had a first name, a middle name, and a last name, and it was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. That in itself shows he was a clear racist, and in the Korematsu versus United States case, his 6 posses or associate judges all held this executive order, and the one dissenting judge was left stranded when he said that this was a clear racist action. But that racism just doesn't stop there. Now let's move back to Calvin Coolidge, the Republican president before Herbert Hoover and Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Coolidge can definitely be described as a fiscal conservative with his Revenue Acts of 1924 and 1926, which both decreased taxes and halted spending increases. He was also opposed to farm subsidies. So clearly Coolidge was a fiscal conservative. But according to the progressive logic, he must have been a segregationist and a racist, since it was actually conservatives who were the racists and liberals were the ones trying to end racism. But it turns out history proves them wrong, and here it goes. Numbered among our population are some 12 million colored people. Under our Constitution, their rights are just as sacred as those of any other citizen. It is both a public and private duty to protect those rights. The Congress ought to exercise all its powers of prevention and punishment against the hideous crime of lynching, of which Negroes are by no means the sole sufferers, but for which they furnish a majority of the victims. Already a considerable sum is appropriate to give the Negroes vocational training in agriculture. About $500,000 is recommended for medical courses at Howard University to help contribute to the re-education of 500 colored doctors needed each year. On amount of integration of large numbers into industrial centers, it has also been proposed that a commission be created composed of members of both races to formulate a better policy of mutual understanding and confidence. Such an effort is to be commended. Everyone would rejoice in the accomplishment of the results it seeks. But it is well to recognize that these difficulties are to a large extent local problems which must be worked out by the mutual forbearance and human kindness of each community. Such a method gives much more promise of a real remedy than outside interference. That is coupled with the fact that Coolidge went against the Klan. An important factor contributing to the Klan's decline was the rejection of the Klan and all stood for by Presidents Warren G. Harding and Calvin Coolidge, both Republicans. Both presidents above rose the prevalent prejudice and bigotry of their day. They offered deeds, not words, to the Klan's victims. This was manifested, for example, in the support for the dire anti-lynching bill, which was not passed because of Southern Democratic filibusters. In their support for homeland in Palestine for Jews, the KKK didn't really like Jews, and encouragement of Jewish philanthropic efforts, and in Coolidge's granting citizenship to all Native Americans and urging his cabinet secretaries to give black employees an even chance, as he put it. More importantly, they did not distance themselves from blacks, from Catholics, or from Jews. Rather, both presidents reached out to them publicly as worthy, patriotic citizens, contributing to the well-being of the Republic. Why is it that President Roosevelt is never heard in a sentence regarding anti-lynching bills? Because he didn't propose any. Roosevelt cut deals instead with Southern Democrats, saying that if you vote for my government expansions, I will not propose federal anti-lynching bills. But Roosevelt's racism can be summed up by one Jesse Owens, a black athlete who won 4 gold medals in the Berlin Olympics. As Mr. Owens put it so eloquently, Hitler didn't snub me, it was our president who snubbed me. The president even sent me a telegram, Jesse Owens. So history is being put in a way that it was actually conservatism and liberalism that was a fight for civil rights, where conservatives opposed it and liberals were for it. And clearly in this example you can see it is bullshit. Calvin Coolidge, a fiscal conservative, by all means wanted to fight for rights for blacks and Jews and Catholics. While on the other hand, Roosevelt was just a big government liberal who just wanted his expansion and was willing to sacrifice the rights of these blacks in order to expand his agenda. History has shown us these facts in clear picture. There's been one party that was a party of locking up Japanese Americans, the party of slavery, and the party of segregation. But history is being told in a way that doesn't tell us which party was it. And I'm here to tell you it was the Democratic Party. Finally, I would like to end off with a note to black Americans. The Democrats were never your friends, they are not your friends, and they never will be your friends. Only big government can cause slavery, segregation, and Jim Crow. And we all know what the party of big government is. So my message to you guys is, don't give them your votes